A fist slammed into the tray table hard enough to rattle the whole row. A man in a suit was standing over a seat, jabbing his finger down at the person sitting in it, spit flying, his voice loud enough that a baby 3 rows back started to cry. The passenger in that seat didn't move. Leather vest, gray beard, scarred hands folded in his lap. He looked up slow and calm and said nothing at all. The suit called him trash, called him a waste of a seat, told him people like him didn't belong up here with real men. His name was Cole Bishop, and in 90 minutes the whole cabin would be screaming it for a very different reason. What could one broken-down old biker in a leather vest possibly do up there that not one other person on that plane could? Stay with me on this one. Let me back it up a little, because you need to understand how it started. Boarding had been ordinary. A regional jet out of Denver, headed for a small field up in Montana, the kind of flight where half the passengers are ranchers and the other half are salesmen. Cole boarded near the end. He was a big man, slow-moving, a little stiff in one knee, and he wore a black leather vest with patches sewn across the back. Anybody who knew the life would have recognized what those patches meant. Most people on that plane didn't. They just saw an old biker and they looked away, the way people always look away. He found a seat, 5A. Window. He folded himself into it, set a worn leather bag under the seat in front of him, and went still. That was his way. Believe me, this was a man who had learned a long time ago that stillness costs nothing and saves everything. Now before the trouble started, there was a small thing that happened, and I want you to hold on to it because it matters later. Across the aisle and 1 row up, in 4C there was a boy. Maybe 16, 17. Traveling alone, which you could tell because he kept checking a folded printout of his connection like it might change if he stared at it hard enough. He had a duffel bag between his feet and a buzz cut growing out, and a jaw set tight against something. When the engines first spun up, his knuckles went white on the armrest and his breathing went shallow and fast, the way it does right before a person loses the fight with their own fear. Cole noticed. Of course he noticed. Cole noticed everything. That was another thing he'd learned in places most of these people couldn't find on a map. He leaned a little across the aisle and said, "Low, just for the kid. First time flying, son." The boy nodded, tight, not trusting his voice. "You headed somewhere good or somewhere hard?" The kid swallowed. "Basic. Reporting for basic training. Army." He said it like a confession, like he was ashamed his hands were shaking about it. And something crossed Cole's face, gone almost before it arrived. "Good outfit," he said. "You'll do fine. Here's the trick nobody tells you. When the fear comes, you don't fight it. You just breathe slower than it wants you to. It can't stay if you won't feed it. You understand?" The boy nodded. Cole gave him a small nod back, and the kid's breathing slowed just a little, and he sat back in his seat. Remember him. Remember the boy in 4C. The man in the suit came down the aisle last. Young, maybe 35, expensive haircut, a watch worth more than most people's cars. His name was Grant Halliday, and he told anyone within earshot that he ran money for people whose names you'd know. He had the boarding pass for 5B. The middle seat right next to Cole. He stopped in the aisle, and stared like someone had left garbage on his chair. "You've got to be kidding me," Grant said. Cole glanced up. "Something wrong?" "Yeah. You're spilling into my seat." Cole wasn't. His shoulders were wide, but he was tucked against the window, taking up exactly what he'd paid for. Grant didn't care. He wanted a fight, and a fight with a quiet old man felt safe to him. That's the thing about bullies. They pick the target they think can't hit back. Grant dropped into 5B hard, throwing an elbow into Cole's arm on the way down. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "I pay for first class of my life, and I get seated next to a Hell's Angel." Cole said nothing. A flight attendant came by, a young woman named Dana with a nervous smile, checking seatbelts before pushback. Grant grabbed her wrist. Not hard, but enough that she flinched. "You need to move him," Grant said, jerking his thumb at Cole. "I'm not sitting next to this. He probably has a knife. He probably has warrants." Dana's smile wobbled. "Sir, the flight's completely full. I can't reseat anyone." "Then I want his name written up. I want it reported that I complained." Grant's voice climbed. Heads turned, then quickly turned back, the way heads do when trouble finds someone else. "People like him shouldn't even be allowed up here." Cole finally spoke, and his voice was low and even, the kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud. "Son, why don't you let the young lady do her job?" Grant leaned in close. "Did I ask you to talk?" "No," Cole said. "You didn't." And he turned back to the window. Now here is the thing you have to understand about Cole Bishop. Every one of those scars on his hands, he'd earned. The stiffness in his knee, he'd earned. And the calm on his face while a stranger screamed spit into his ear, he'd earned that too, in places most of the people on that plane couldn't have found on a map. But nobody asked. Nobody ever asks the quiet man in the leather vest. They just decide they already know. The jet pushed back. Engines spun up. And for a few minutes it was quiet. Then the drinks came. Dana rolled the cart to their row, still shaken, still trying to smile. She handed Grant a bourbon on ice. She offered Cole a coffee, and he took it with a small nod and a "thank you, ma'am," that made her stand up a little straighter. Grant watched that exchange with a sneer curling on his face. And then, slow and deliberate, he tipped his bourbon sideways. The whole glass. Right into Cole's lap. "Oops," Grant said. "My hands." Turbulence. There was no turbulence. The cold liquor soaked through Cole's jeans. A few people nearby saw it happen. A rancher across the aisle opened his mouth, then closed it. Nobody wanted to be next. Cole looked down at his soaked lap. He looked at the empty glass. And then he looked at Grant, and for just 1 second, something moved behind his eyes. Something old and patient and very, very sure of itself. Then it was gone, folded back down under the calm. "That's all right," Cole said. He took a napkin and dabbed at his jeans like a man cleaning up spilled milk. "It'll dry." Grant laughed. He actually laughed, delighted like he'd won something. He pulled out his phone and started filming, narrating for whatever audience lived in his head. "Look at this guy. Big scary biker. can't even stand up for himself. This is what these people actually are. I'll show. And here's where the ugliness spread, because that's what ugliness does when nobody stops it. The boy in 4C had turned around to watch, and Grant caught him looking. "What are you staring at, kid?" Grant said. "You want to sit next to him. Be my guest. You two can trade tattitude." The boy's face went red and he turned back around, and I want you to notice that. Grant didn't just have one target. He had a whole cabin, and he was working through it, one person at a time, the way that kind of man always does when he thinks he's found a room full of people too polite to hit back. He pushed a little more on the old man. He flicked Cole's patch. He asked if the club had a discount for the elderly. He asked loud whether Cole had ever held a real job or just leeched off welfare his whole life. He asked if those scarred hands got that way in a bar fight or a prison yard, and he made sure to say prison yard loud enough for the rows behind him. Dana came back and quietly asked Grant to please lower his voice, and Grant told her to bring him another bourbon and mind her business. She brought it. Her hand was shaking when she set it down, and Cole saw that too, and something in his jaw tightened, and then it let go, and he said nothing. Because here's the truth of it, the thing I really need you to understand about Cole Bishop, and it isn't the thing you think. It wasn't that Cole was afraid. It wasn't that he couldn't have ended it. A man with hands like that, with a history like his, could have folded Grant Halliday in half in about a second and a half. The reason he sat there and took it was simpler and harder than fear. He'd made a promise a long time ago to a man he was flying up to Montana to see that he was done being the fist. That he'd let the loud ones be loud and keep his own hands quiet. So he drank his coffee and he watched the clouds go by outside the window, and he let the ugliness roll off him. A few passengers decided he was pathetic. A few decided he was probably dangerous and were glad he was staying quiet. Not one of them decided to help him. Except a little while later, the boy did a small thing. When the cart came back through, and Dana handed Cole a fresh coffee, the kid in 4C reached across the aisle and passed Cole a stack of napkins for his still damp jeans, without a word, just handed them over. Cole took them and looked at the boy for a second and said, "Quiet, thank you, son." That's the first decent thing anybody's done on this whole flight. Grant snorted. The boy sat back down. And that was that, or it looked like that was that. An hour in, the plane hit a patch of real turbulence, and it got everybody's attention off the old man for a while. The seatbelt light dinged on. The jet shuddered and dropped and climbed. Grant, for all his big talk, went pale and gripped his armrests white-knuckled. Across the aisle the boy went rigid too, his breathing climbing again, and Cole leaned over one more time through the bumps and said just loud enough, "Slower than it wants you to, remember. Breathe slower than it wants." And the kid did, and the fear let go of him again, and he shot Cole a look that was half embarrassment and half something close to gratitude. Cole didn't move at all through any of it. He just rode it easy, like a man in a rocking chair. Then the bumps smoothed out. The captain's voice came over the speaker, warm and unhurried, telling everyone they were through the rough air and it'd be smooth sailing on into Montana. The seatbelt light clicked off. Dana came through collecting cups, and she gave Cole a small, grateful smile as she took his. Grant put his earbuds in and closed his eyes. The baby 3 rows back had finally fallen asleep. Outside the window the mountains slid by, gold in the late afternoon light, and the whole cabin settled into that soft, sleepy hum a plane gets when everyone finally relaxes. Safe. Ordinary. Almost peaceful. That peace lasted about 4 minutes. The first sign was the smell. A sharp, electric burning that drifted back from the front of the cabin. Then the plane lurched, hard nose dipping, and the drink carts rattled. From behind the cockpit door came a sound nobody on a plane ever wants to hear. A thump. A body hitting the floor. The door banged open and Dana half fell out of the galley, her face gone white as paper. Behind her, through the open cockpit door, you could see one pilot slumped sideways over the controls, unconscious, maybe worse. The captain was twisted in his seat, one hand clutching his chest, his skin gray, fighting just to breathe. A heart attack at the worst possible moment, and his first officer down beside him from the same bad air or bad luck. Nobody would ever be sure which. Here's what changed in that one instant, and I need you to really get this. 2 minutes earlier, the biggest problem on that airplane was a rich man's cruelty and an old man's pride. Now the problem was that 71 people were sitting in a metal tube 7 miles above the ground, and there was nobody left up front who could fly it. This wasn't about who deserved his seat anymore. This was about whether any of them would ever touch the ground alive. Dana grabbed the intercom, her voice shaking. Is there anyone on board with flight experience? Any pilot? Please. We need help in the cockpit right now. Silence. 71 people and dead silence. A woman started to cry. A man threw up. Grant Halliday ripped his earbuds out and looked around wildly, and for the first time all day the arrogance was gone off his face, replaced with the plain animal fear of a man who has just understood he is not in control of anything. And here's the part nobody expected. Before Cole moved at all, it was the boy in 4C who spoke. He stood halfway up, pointed across the aisle and said, loud in a voice cracking with fear, him. Ask him. He knows things. Ask the old man. The boy didn't know what Cole knew. He just knew, from 1 hour of small kindnesses in a mean little cabin, that if there was one person on this airplane worth trusting with his life, it was the quiet man in the leather vest. And that, right there, is the whole reason to be decent to strangers, because you never know which one of them is going to speak up for you when the floor drops out. And in seat 5A, the old biker unbuckled his belt. Cole stood up slow, one hand on the seat back for his bad knee. And he said in that same low, even voice, I can fly it. If you're still with me, do me one favor and hit that subscribe button, because what this old man did in the next 20 minutes is the reason I had to tell you this story at all. The cabin turned to look at him. And of course, Grant Halliday laughed. Even now. Even scared. Him. Are you serious? He can barely stand up. He's a burnout in a leather vest. He'll kill us all faster than the empty cockpit will. But nobody was listening to Grant anymore. That was the moment his voice stopped mattering, and you could see him feel it happen, see the room turn away from him all at once, and it frightened him worse than the burning smell did. Dana looked at Cole. She looked at the patches on his vest. And then she looked at his hands, those big scarred hands, and something in her decided to trust them. "Sir," she said, "come with me." Now. Cole moved up the aisle. He wasn't slow anymore. The stiffness seemed to fall off him with every step, the way it does when a man stops remembering he's old and starts remembering who he is. As he passed the boy in 4C, he put one hand on the kid's shoulder for just a second, a squeeze, the kind an old soldier gives a young one before something hard, and he said, "Breathe slower than it wants." Same as before. "I've got us." Then he stepped over the burning smell and into the cockpit and took one look at the two men down, and the panel lit up red in front of him, and he did not freeze. Believe me, that's the whole thing right there. He did not freeze. He knelt by the captain first. "Sir, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." A weak squeeze. "Good. You're gonna live. Just breathe and let me work." He got a passenger, a nurse 2 rows back, to come forward and hold the captain, get him flat in the aisle, keep him breathing. Then Cole eased the unconscious first officer out of the right seat with Dana's help, and he lowered himself into it, and he put his scarred hands on the controls. And something in the cabin shifted, because everyone watching through that open door could see it. The way his hands settled on the yoke, and the throttles like they'd been made for exactly that. There was nothing unsure in it. Nothing. The jet was in a slow descending bank, drifting toward high country, losing altitude it couldn't afford. Cole leveled the wings first. Just like that one smooth correction, the horizon came back flat. Then he found the radio, keyed it, and spoke, calm as a man ordering coffee. "Denver Center, this is regional flight. I've got both pilots incapacitated. I'm a passenger and I've got the aircraft. Requesting vectors to the nearest field with a long runway. Be advised, I know what I'm doing." There was a pause on the other end. Then a controller's voice, tight and careful. "Aircraft understood, say your flight experience." Cole looked out at the mountains coming up gold and jagged in the last light, and for the first time in a lot of years, he told a stranger the truth about himself. 22 years. United States Marine Corps. I flew the A-6 Intruder off carriers, and I flew close air support in weather that would make your instructors cry. I've landed jets on a boat at night, in a storm with the deck pitching 30 feet. Your runway isn't going anywhere, and it isn't shooting at me. So point me at it, son, and let me bring these people home. Back in the cabin, Grant Halliday sat very still and very small. The controller gave him a heading, and then he gave Cole the bad news along with it. The nearest field long enough for the jet was socked in. There was a weather front sitting right across the only approach that worked, a wall of wind and gray, and the field was down in the bottom of it. There was a longer runway further out, in clear air, but the captain's heart wouldn't wait that long, and the fuel math didn't love it either. "Aircraft, advise your intentions," the controller said, and you could hear in his voice that he already knew what he was asking. He was asking a 70-year-old man to thread a crippled jet full of strangers through, whether that scrubs experienced airline crews on their good days. Cole keyed the mic. "We're not going to make the far field with the captain like he is. We take the near one. Give me the vectors, and give me the numbers on that runway." A pause. Then the controller read it all up, and Cole flew it, banking the jet gentle and sure and starting the long descent toward a strip of concrete outside a Montana town nobody on board could have named an hour ago. And here's where I have to tell you what was happening in the back, because the story wasn't only up front. Dana went down the aisle doing the thing they train them for, and the thing you pray you never see, telling 71 people how to fold themselves over for a hard landing, where the exits were, how to leave everything behind and just go. And people don't do that quietly. There was a man arguing that they should divert somewhere else, anywhere else. There was the young mother with the baby, unable to get her own hands to stop shaking long enough to fasten the belt. And it was the boy from 4C, the kid on his way to basic, who unbuckled and crossed the aisle and knelt in front of her and said the exact words Cole had said to him. "Breathe slower than it wants. Here, give me the buckle." He fastened it. He held her hand. A scared teenager doing the brave thing, because an old biker had shown him how about an hour before it counted. That's how it travels, you understand. Decency. It travels. Cole talked the whole way down. Not to calm the passengers. To calm himself, the old way, the way he'd been taught before some of these people were born. Airspeed's good. Sink rate's good. Gonna hit some chop on the way in. The jet started to buck as it dropped into the weather. The mountains closed in on both sides. Alarms chirped. A crosswind grabbed the tail and tried to swing the nose, and Cole caught it with a boot of rudder before it could even finish trying. A correction so fast and so small that Dana, strapped into the jump seat behind him, wasn't sure she'd seen him move. Then the panel lit up worse. A warning horn started going, and Dana, watching over his shoulder, saw a red light she didn't understand and heard Cole mutter one word under his breath. The near-field's instrument landing system, the electronic beam that guides a jet down through cloud to the runway, had dropped offline on the ground. A glitch, a nothing on a normal day when a pilot can just see. Cole wasn't going to have a beam to follow through all that gray. He was going to have to fly it down on raw instruments and his own hands, and then find a runway with his eyes in whatever slice of visibility the weather decided to give him at the bottom. And if that slice was too thin, there'd be no second try with the captain dying in the aisle. The controller's voice came up, "Careful. Aircraft, be advised the ILS is out of service. Are you able?" And Cole said, flat as a table, "Son, I've landed with less. Just keep talking to me and keep everybody else off this frequency." "Landing gear," he said. Dana read him the checklist off a laminated card with a shaking voice, and Cole answered every item flat and certain. "Gear down," Vlap said. "Runway somewhere out ahead in all that gray." The airplane groaned and shuddered as it dropped through the worst of the front, rain hammering the windscreen so hard it sounded like gravel, the whole airframe shaking like it wanted to come apart. And Cole flew it down through the middle of that, with his eyes moving between 3 instruments and his hands making 100 small corrections a minute, and his voice never once climbing above the level of a man reading a grocery list. Then they broke out of the clouds at 800 feet, and there it was. A thin black line of runway, wet and shining, dead ahead but sliding sideways in his window because the crosswind was howling straight across it. It was the kind of landing that washes out real pilots. A gusting crosswind, a wet runway, a jet full of souls, and one shot to get it right. Cole didn't take the plane straight in. He crabbed it, held the nose cocked into the wind, walked it down that invisible line with his hands and his feet working together in 100 tiny motions. The way a man plays an instrument he learned so long ago, he doesn't have to think anymore. A gust hit them at 300 feet and dropped the whole airplane like the floor had vanished. And somebody in the back screamed. And Cole fed in power and caught it and set it right back on the line without a word. The ground came up. The threshold flashed under the nose. And at the last second, right at the last second, he kicked the rudder and dropped the upwind wing and straightened her out. And the wheels touched the wet concrete with one clean chirp. The mains first, then the nose, smooth as anything. He was on the brakes, and the reverse thrust before most of the passengers even understood they were down. The jet slowed, and rolled out straight and true down the center of that runway with room to spare, and came to a stop. For a second there was total silence. Then the whole cabin came apart. People screaming, crying, laughing, hugging strangers. That raw sound people make when they had already said goodbye to their own lives and got them handed back. The nurse in the aisle was calling out that the captain was still breathing, still with them, that Cole had bought him the time he needed. The young mother was sobbing into the shoulder of the boy from 4C, and the boy was crying too and grinning at the same time. A kid who'd found out in the worst hour of his life that he had the thing in him he was scared he didn't have. Fire trucks came howling across the field with their lights spinning. And through all of it, Cole Bishop sat in the right seat with his scarred hand still on the controls, eyes closed, breathing slow, doing the only thing he'd wanted to do all day, which was be still. They opened the doors. Paramedics rushed the cockpit and got the two pilots onto stretchers, both alive, both going to make it. And as Cole finally hauled himself up out of that seat, his bad knee stiff again now that it was allowed to be, the passengers saw him step back into the cabin, and one by one they stood up. Every single one of them. They stood and they clapped, and a lot of them were crying while they did it. Ranchers and salesmen, and a young mother holding her baby, all of them on their feet for the old biker they'd spent the whole flight looking away from. The boy from 4C didn't clap. He stood at attention, that half-grown buzz cut and that set jaw, and he brought his hand up in the first salute of a life that hadn't officially started yet. And Cole caught it out of the corner of his eye and returned it, one soldier to another. And that was the only moment on the whole flight where you could see the old man's own eyes go wet. Cole didn't say anything else. He just nodded, a little embarrassed by all of it, and made his slow way down the aisle toward the door. He had to pass 5B to get there. Grant Halliday was still in his seat. He couldn't stand. His hands were shaking too badly. The expensive haircut, the watch, the sneer, none of it was anywhere to be found. What was left was just a scared young man who had spent 2 hours screaming cruelty at the one person on the plane who was about to save his life. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then in a small broken voice, he managed it. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Thank you." Cole stopped in the aisle beside him and looked down at him for a long moment. There was no anger in his face. That was the thing that got Grant the worst, I think. There was no anger at all. Just a kind of tired understanding, the look of a man who had seen every kind of person there is, and long ago, stopped being surprised by the small ones. "Son," Cole said quietly, "you spent this whole flight deciding who I was by looking at my vest." He put one big scarred hand on Grant's shoulder, gentle, the same hands that had just walked a jet through a wall of wind. Next time somebody's quiet, you might want to wonder why. The loud ones are never the ones you have to worry about. And they're never the ones who save you either. Then he took his worn leather bag out of the overhead bin and walked off that plane, down the stairs, out onto the wet Montana tarmac in the last gold light of the day, without waiting for a single reporter or a single camera. There was a motorcycle waiting for him at that little airport. He'd had it shipped up ahead of him days before. Because here's the last thing, the thing that ties it all up. Cole Bishop hadn't been flying to Montana for a vacation, or a rally, or anything you'd guess. He was flying up to bury a man. His old wingman. The pilot who'd pulled him out of a crash 40 years ago and stayed his brother every day since. The same brother he'd made that promise to. The one about keeping his hands quiet and letting the loud ones be loud. That was why he'd been so quiet in 5A. That was the weather behind his eyes the whole time. He was already carrying more than any bully could pile on him. He set his bag on the bike. He swung his stiff leg over the seat, slow, an old man again now that nobody needed him not to be. And before he started the engine, he sat still one more time, hands folded on the tank, gray beard, leather vest, calm as the moment the whole thing began, just a broken-down biker nobody had bothered to look at twice. Then he rode off into the dark to say goodbye to his friend, and left 71 people behind him, who would spend the rest of their lives telling the story of the man in seat 5A.